Friends, welcome to this morning's service. I hope everyone is safe, everyone is healthy, and everyone has found something during the past week that makes them happy, makes them smile. Find a place to become comfortable, a place to become quiet. And wherever you may be sitting, let's just start by focusing on our breathing. Breathe in, feel the air filling up our lungs. We breathe out, feel our lungs collapsing. Breathe in, breathe out. Pay attention to your surroundings. What does the room look like where you're sitting? What emotions, what feelings do you experience when you're in that specific space? Become aware of the people that you may be sharing this time with, or those you may not be sharing this time with. Those you may be missing, those who are absent, but also those who are present. And lastly, become aware of God's presence in this space. His presence in all spaces, wherever we may be. His presence with all people we may meet. And listen to this beautiful song sung by Delmari, which just once again reaffirms that eternal truth, that God is present wherever we may be and whatever we may be doing. The text for this morning is divided up into two sections. Firstly, 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 to 14, and 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 to 11, which reads as follows. We start with chapter 4. Verse 12, Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. In the second section, chapter 5, verse 6, Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, stand firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen. Now we are still busy with 1 Peter, as we have been busy during the past few weeks, and we are starting to wind down, starting to bring an end the series with which we have been busy with. That's 3 times I used the word busy now, very eloquent. But today we're going to focus a bit on the idea of persistence, Christian persistence specifically. For the past few weeks we've been looking at Christian hope. What does it look like? What is it? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? How do we live it out? What makes it different from other forms of hope? What makes it unique? And we're going to try to do the same this morning, very briefly, with the idea of persistence. What does Christian persistence look like? What is Christian persistence? And the first clue we find when we turn to verse 13, where we read, But rejoice that you participate in sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. One of the most obvious indications of what a Christian is, in my opinion, is to be found in the name. We call ourselves Christians. What does that say? We have named ourselves after Jesus Christ. It's a public declaration that whatever we do, we try to be as Christ-like in that. And we are so convinced of this that we are willing to call ourselves Christians, followers of Christ, in other words. So everything we do is centered around him, centered around this figure who lived 2,000 years ago. Not just the way in which we interact and speak, the way in which we live, but the way in which we eat. We gather with others, we gather in community. The places we live, the places we stay, the spaces we choose to enter, and what we do when we enter into these spaces. But sometimes spaces are forced on us. We find ourselves in an environment, in a place that we did not choose. An environment and a place that may not be comfortable to us, that may actually be hurtful to us, that may be causing us damage. Spaces within which we experience destruction. It's not far-fetched to say that currently most of the world is finding themselves in such a space. But what do Christians do in these spaces that others maybe not do or may not do? I would like to put forward the one thing Christians do is we persist in these spaces. We persist to live in a way that reflects Christ in the same way that we live in comfortable spaces, or the same way we persist in comfortable spaces. We do not just love when it's easy to love, but we love when we are being rejected. We are not just generous and charitable when it's easy to do that, but we try and be generous and charitable when we are being condemned. That's one idea for me that lies at the core of Christian persistence. Because Christ did the same. When he was a carpenter, he acted the same way as he did when he was being tortured by the Romans. He persisted in trying to show the world a different way, regardless of his circumstances, regardless of the environment and the spaces within which he found himself. And we as Christians try and persist in the same way. We live as Jesus lived, in both the comfortable places, but also in the places of suffering. And even more so, by doing that, we're actually declaring that God was right in still believing in humanity, in not abandoning us. We are actually vindicating God's salvation act when he sent Christ. Because if we look objectively at humanity, objectively at our civilizations, at our societies, most would come to the conclusion that we are more inclined to hurt each other than we are to love each other. That we lean more towards being selfish than we do towards being communal. But when God looked at this picture, he said no. He said these creatures are worth saving. Even more, he said these creatures are worth saving so much that I give my one and only Son. And by our willingness today to actually adhere to Christ's message, to live like Christ lived, we are saying we agree with God. We are saying what God did 2,000 years ago was not in vain. If God believes in humanity, we ourselves will also believe in humanity, and we will show this through persisting in trying to live like Christ, regardless of the spaces, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the suffering. So that's first. What is Christian persistence? Christian persistence is fundamentally a declaration of faith, a declaration of both God's faith in us as well as a declaration of our faith in God's restoration plan for creation. What does it look like? One of the key things I would say that makes Christian persistence different from other forms of persistence is found in the word humility, humbleness. Most of us are probably bekend Engels. No, most of us know the story of the athlete. The athlete, be it a man or a woman, who struggles, sweats, works hard day in, day out, wakes up early, makes sacrifices to achieve a certain goal. And oftentimes this is the metaphor or the idea of the story to which we turn when we try and explain persistence. We say, look at the athlete. Look at how they persist for this goal that they want to achieve. And that's a very good explanation of persistence. But something within that story has often bothered me. It's that the end goal to which this person is persevering, this end goal that keeps them motivated to keep on persisting, is a very personal goal. It's a goal of personal glory, personal acclaim, a goal to reach, or an end goal to reach a personal goal. So it's very much centered on what that person needs to achieve or wants to achieve. And that helps them to persist. Yet, in the Christian faith, that becomes difficult. Because one of our core beliefs is fundamentally what is wrong with humanity, what is wrong with me is our selfishness. Our inherent ability to achieve personal goals, regardless of how we get there, regardless of what we need to do. Therefore, the story of the athlete as a symbol of persistence falls a bit short within the Christian perspective. Because how can we say I'm persisting just for personal salvation? Or I am persisting so I can be a better Christian, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of what I may have to do in order to get there. Christians persist not so that we may be glorified, not so that someone may come along and say, you are just like Mother Teresa, for example, or you are just like Christ. Christians persist not to be glorified, but rather to glorify another. When we persist regardless of our circumstance, regardless of the situation, when we persist both in good times as well as bad times, we're doing this not because we want others to see what a good Christian we are. We are doing this because we want to tell others the wonderful and joyous message that Christ brought. That Christ brought with his life and that Christ brought to the world. So, for us, the idea of persisting like an athlete in order to achieve personal success is not true. The Christian persists in order to glorify the one above. In order to tell the world that this God is good. That he is good both in the good, but that he is also good in the bad. That God stays good when everything goes our way, and that God remains good when we are suffering. So that's the second idea of Christian persistence. So the first Christian persistence is a declaration of God's faith in humanity. It's a declaration of our belief in God's restoration plan. And the second idea of Christian persistence is that we do it in humility. We persist not for personal acclaim. We persist not in order to achieve personal glory, but rather we persist in order to glorify another. Now, this all sounds good and nice and well and very churchy. But the truth is, sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes it's actually the hardest thing to do. Suffering is suffering. It hurts, it destroys, it tears us up. And we act in ways which sometimes reflect the worst in us. And to then come along and just tell us to persist, be like Jesus, even if you're hungry. Be like Jesus, even if you're being abused. Be like Jesus, even if you're being tortured. This may be the last thing that we want to hear. Suffering tends to isolate us. It tends to make our world smaller. It tends to shift our gaze inward. We are so consumed by what we are experiencing, so consumed by the effects that it's having on us, that we've only got eyes for ourselves. And this may have been true for the community in 1 Peter. Peter was surely aware of this. And that's maybe why he reminds them in verse 9, resist him standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers and sisters throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of suffering. And that's the last thing which defines Christian persistence within suffering. It's the knowledge that we are not persisting alone. We are not persisting on our own. And this knowledge may give us strength. Strength to know that others are also suffering, and others are also willing to keep on persisting in trying to live true to the Christian ideals regardless of their circumstances. And maybe, just maybe, that can give me some strength to live true to my own Christian beliefs and faith. This gives us encouragement. Encouragement to know that if others were able to endure far worse and still persist, maybe, just maybe, I'm able to persist in my own current situation. And lastly, it provides solace. It provides us access to a community of people who are experiencing the same things that we are experiencing. People who are also struggling with the question of, how do I live like Jesus even when I am suffering? How do I persist in being true to these Christian ideals even if my circumstances are arranged against me? It provides us access to a community that knows what that feels like, that can give us solace, that can understand the pain and the hurt that we are experiencing, and understand the struggle of trying to persist in that. Many of us are maybe tired of hearing about the current crisis around each and every corner, constantly being bombarded from all avenues about the news of Corona. It's a word I even struggle to say these days. But it's the truth of our situation. It's where we are at right now. And it seems to me that we've got the option of trying to persist in living like Jesus, even in these extremely challenging times, filled with uncertainty, filled with doubt, filled with fear, to still persist in living like Jesus lived. And that's my prayer for us as a community today. May we persist. May we persist as Christians. Persist in declaring our faith. Persist in declaring God's faith in us. Persist in humility. Not so as to glorify ourselves, but to glorify another. And persist in knowing that we do not do this on our own. That there is a global community of Christians. A community where we can find solace. A community where we can find encouragement. A community where we find strength.